Okay, this is the first video for our innovative product design craft exercises. In this video, we'll talk about sketching. We'll talk about getting your ideas on paper, just some rough ideas that you can show to people. We're going to start with just some warm-up exercises. Normally, just like anything else you're going to do that requires some kind of movement, you're going to warm up. And so here's a good one for warming up. And you don't have to have anything. I just got regular white paper. You can use a pencil. I don't think I will because it doesn't show up as well on the video. So I'll use a Sharpie. First thing, make some dots. So anybody can make dots. So we'll make a sort. It doesn't matter where you put them. I'm going to put some on the left-hand side and some on the right-hand side. And it doesn't really matter how many or where you put them. You don't want a lot of them. 4 on each side is fine. And what you're going to do with this is basically you're going to connect the dots. But what you're practicing is, rapid movements, not sitting there and, trying to trace. If you try to just barely move along, it's going to be a wobbly line, and you normally don't want that. So it's going to be movement. You might, it's kind of going to move. Your whole arm is going to move at the shoulder joint when you're making this motion. And it doesn't matter which dots you're connecting. Just pick one dot on one side and another dot on the other side and connect those. So it might look something like this. You take a practice. Maybe you don't want to do that really long one first. Maybe you just want to do this one. So you take a little practice, aim, and then, well, I missed the paper. Actually, my Sharpie isn't writing very well. Let's get something that writes a little better. Let's get a really big Sharpie. All right. And you're just trying to get close. You don't have to try and exactly hit the dots. You're just trying to practice getting close to them. And then pick another pair of dots and, do a couple. And try to get you a nice, take a couple of practice swings and then commit to the line you're going to draw. And if you miss, that's okay. It doesn't really, you're not getting graded on this or anything. So you're just practicing warming up. And don't be too stiff and rigid about it. Try to be fluid. Some are going to be harder. This one's hard for me, the position I'm in, going downward. It's much easier to do this kind of motion versus this one. And so I'm going to practice doing some that are a little harder. I missed totally on that one. That's okay. Maybe we'll do this one. It kind of helps if you get the location on the first dot and then you look at the second one where you're headed, and that'll help you try to hit the actual target you're aiming for. You might actually hit both of them. Do that a couple of times. You don't want to fill the whole thing up because we're going to do some more on this in just a second. So those are one thing. All drawings have lines in them, so you're practicing lines and you're trying to make nice smooth lines, and you want to have these lines not wobbly in general. You normally want them to be pretty smooth. Another thing that all drawings have some form of is circles. So pick some areas in here, like here's a good one, and inscribe a circle in this little spot. So you're basically trying to hit some of these edges and put a circle in there. Circles, again, you're going to move your whole arm, and you take some practice ones, and then you put a circle in there. And it does, this is a little lopsided over here. That's fine. If you have a pencil or something lighter than a Sharpie, maybe you make a couple of circles, and as you zone in on the actual circle you're trying to make, you press a little bit harder and reinforce those lines. Maybe make some little circles right in here, a little bit smaller one. And I'm not moving my fingers, moving my whole arm. So this one's a smaller one, so we got to do a little bit smaller. That one's a little bit wobbly. We need more practice. So here's one over here. Oh, that one's really bad. And so it's not even close to right. So you just do some more. This one actually is hard to do with this clip in the way. Let's put one over here. There we go. That's okay circle. So it doesn't matter if you do some really bad ones because you're just warming up. That's all you're really doing. All right. Now we're going to pick out some triangles, circles, triangles, lines, and rectangles or polygons are going to be the key shapes that we're going to make for almost any drawing. So find something that looks like a triangle. Maybe this looks like a triangle. So normally these would be kind of light because you would be using you know, a pencil or something like that, and it wouldn't be so dark. And you would go over and try to reinforce, you know, some of these to make your actual triangle in here. And pick a, you know, maybe another one somewhere. Here's one. And so these are kind of like the boundary lines in your final drawing. You're trying to reinforce those, and so you want those nice and neat. And so just, you know, find some little shapes, reinforce them, and that'll get you warmed up. So now you do this for, you know, maybe 5 minutes. Doesn't even take very long. Maybe 5 minutes, and you go in and just warm up on those. And if you have some of these you really don't like, maybe you try and do a better one on there. Getting better. Sometimes you do like this, and the more you go, you eventually, if this wasn't a big fat Sharpie, you would have formed the circle that you want to do. So this kind of gets you warmed up. The next thing you want to do is work on how can you turn these shapes into something that has depth in them. So you could go in and shade these things. So maybe you pick a hot spot where the light, maybe the light is shining from over here, and that's the hot spot, and you pick a shadow side over here, and you know, you kind of give it a little shadow. And that's one way to create some depth, but we're going to do something that's a little more, I don't know, I'll call it technical, a little more formal way to create depth. This is certainly reasonable if you want to do something like that. But we're going to do something a little different. Okay, we're back for the second part. What we're going to do to add depth to our sketches that we're going to create is use perspective. A particular kind we're going to use perspective that's called 2-point perspective. There's single point and 3-point, but we're going to use 2-point. And what this does is basically you create 2 points that exist. They might be imaginary. Sometimes you literally draw them on the page. I'm going to draw them just so you can see them. But you create 2 points, and they're on this imaginary horizon line. You normally don't draw the horizon line. I'm just drawing it there. And you use these as vanishing points. So if I were drawing a cube, I want to create a cube or something rectangular in this area. First, I would, and again, normally you're doing this with pencils. I'm just using a pen, little Muji fountain pen, so that you can have a better chance of actually seeing these on the screen. But I would start with creating maybe the first corner. You know, we'll have one corner facing towards me. So I create something that's going to represent that first corner. And again, these first few lines should be really light, like construction lines, and you'll reinforce them later when you have them in the place that you want. So maybe this represents that front edge of a corner that's facing towards you. If you put it down here below the horizon line, then when you draw your cube in this space, it'll look like you're looking down on top of it. If you put this line up above the horizon line, then it'll make it look really big and imposing, and it'll have you know, more presence on the page. Normally, you're putting it down here so you can see more of the features. Put it up too high, then you're basically looking underneath it, and unless there's a feature on the bottom that you want to show off, then there's not a good reason to put it up really high. If you put it right on the horizon line, then you lose a lot of the features. You just kind of see the front two corners or whatever it is that you've gotten there. So I'm going to put it normally down a little below the horizon line. Obviously, the further down you drop it, then the more you're going to see the top of whatever it is you're drawing. So this might even be a little bit low, but this is what we'll go with. Now, so if this is the front edge of my cube that I'm going to draw, then it would vanish off into these points. Now, the closer you put these points together, it's really going to skew this cube. So sometimes you want to put them, maybe even imagine they're off the edges of your page. So this is going to look a little bit dramatic, I guess, but we'll do it this way. So what you're trying to do is you imagine there's a corner here, and going back to our, you know, our dots and lines, you're going to connect this dot with the vanishing point. And again, it's a light construction line. I'll have to do it a little darker just so you can see it. So I'm just going to do this kind of motion, you know, something like that. Maybe I have to come this way to get it to draw. So this would normally be really light. And you do the same thing with the bottom corner. Hopefully you can see, yeah, you can see that, I think. Now, for you, I'm totally much better at certain angles, so I would want to turn the page. And so definitely don't feel like you have to keep the page, you know, right in front of you. Feel like turn it right side up, so that, because there are going to be some of these lines that are easier, some motions are easier for you to make, and others are just a little awkward to make. So feel free to turn the page around so that you can make the motions better. So this little triangle here is kind of defining. Remember I'm trying to put a cube or some kind of rectangle in this area. So this is kind of creating that edge of it. It doesn't necessarily go all the way back to there. We'll figure out where it ends in a second. So I need to do the same thing on these corners. So this corner, I want it to end somewhere in there. So we'll do something like that. And then this one, the bottom, will also vanish off into that point. So we'll do something like this. Something like that. And so now I've got that front corner. I want to kind of mark off, you know, how do I want this to be a long flat cube or rectangular or a cube, or, you know, what kind of shape do I want it to be? I guess a cube would, all the sides would be the equal size, but so what shape do I want this little thing? Let's pull a line down over here and one over here. So those define the other edges. And now I've got an intersection here that can vanish off into this point. So it could do something like this. I'm just trying to get some lines in there. This intersection will go to this vanishing point. This is where it's going to be a little bit distorted because, or exaggerated, I guess. And you can start to see our little rectangular object starting to come to life down in here. Maybe I'll switch over to something a little darker. And maybe I want it to have rounded corners. So I could go in and go ahead and round these corners over. And then start filling in the, you know, the edges. You know, in this one. I'm drawing this really kind of small too. Normally you would want this object that you're trying to present to somebody for an idea, you want it to fill up most of your page. You know, not a tiny little thing like this. Here we've got an interesting case because we don't really actually have corners up here. We've rounded them over. So maybe we'll wait on that one just a second. Let's do this back one. There. Turn our page. Put this guy in. Let's try to get this bottom over here. And I think I've already gone over this one, but it could use a little more. I don't think I did this one. You can start to see our little shape appearing there. Now here, I've got a rounded corner, so I want to have something like this little shape. Sometimes you might want to put these contour, I don't know if this counts as a contour line necessarily, but these little guidelines, I'd probably do them a lot lighter than what a Sharpie's going to do for me. But I did that. Maybe you want a feature, maybe you want a little rib or an indentation all the way through here. If you go and let's just mark the center here and here and here. So I'm taking each of these edges and marking the center, and then I could go in and draw a feature across there. You know, maybe it's like a little box that's going to open up, and that's where it's going to open at. And here we could do one. Now this, to carry on with that rounded, we're going to round that off. Now I've got something that's starting to look like maybe a idea that I have for this little rectangular rounded off box. One thing that'll help make this a little more real is if it has a shadow. So how you can go about creating a realistic looking shadow is, imagine somewhere, let's say, draw kind of crooked, let's straighten up there a little bit. All right, let's imagine that we have a pole over here. You don't literally have to draw this thing. This is just kind of what we're going to imagine. And we're going to pick a direction for the sun. I'm going to put the sun somewhere over here. And if I think about the sun casting a shadow, or this pole casting a shadow in the sun, then its shadow, I'm going to make its shadow look something like this. So this little line right here is basically like a light ray, and I'm tracing all the light that's getting blocked, and this is the shadow right here. If I can take these two lines now, and I've established the orientation of the sun coming from over here, and the direction I want the shadow to be cast, I can take those two lines, and everywhere I have a corner, I am going to try this in pencil because I don't want it to overpower the other lines here. Everywhere I have a corner, so a corner, even a corner back there. This one, probably you could ignore that one because it's going to cast a shadow that would be inside the box, so it's not going to cast one. This one probably also is not going to affect us the way I've drawn this. So maybe just these two corners. Start at the corner, draw this line down, so parallel to this line. So maybe you get your, for me it's going to be easier to turn it something like this and move where I'm at. So something like this, and we're going to try to just send that line down and parallel to that one, get this parallel, put over here off of that corner, and then I'm going to take the shadow and draw wherever this corner would meet the ground. So I'm going to drop straight down, it's going to meet down here, and I'm going to draw this line. So I'm taking this line and starting here and drawing it. I'm going to do the same thing over here, and let's see, I lost my, and what this did is it creates a little pattern here. Well, actually, let's go ahead and do this one too, see where it's going to land. So even though it's going to be behind the box, let's see what it lands. And then that corner for it would end over here, and it would come out like this. So I end up with a point here. I may make these more visible. So normally you wouldn't do this part, but there's an intersection of a light ray and a shadow. There's a shadow and the light ray that correspond with it intersects there. This one, light ray and shadow, intersects back there. So it's actually behind our object. But now if I connect these dots, so if I go over here and having trouble drawing with my Sharpie. So there. And again, remember this corner is kind of rounded, so maybe round this one a little bit. Go over there, connect that point, and then this one's back here. Connect it in there. That is a pretty good representation of where my shadow is going to land. Now it looks like my Sharpie's about out of ink, so we actually get a nice gray here for our shadow, which is fine. You might do a little crosshatch, you might shade it in, maybe you have some kind of marker that you can shade that thing in, or just a pencil. You could, turn the pencil on its side and get a nice shadow in there if you wanted to. And it starts to make it a little more believable. The other thing that'll make it pop out is if the sun is over here, then this side is going to be in shadow, or at least not have as much light on it. And so if you just take and put a little shading on that side, something like that, starts to make this have a lot more form to it. Now I'm gonna have to exaggerate it because it's not showing up very well on the screen. And then remember, this rolled under here, so there's probably a little bit darker edge that we might could see under here and on the ground. So a little extra dark down there. And all of a sudden you have a little box that your idea that's in your head other people can get a pretty good idea of what you were thinking. So your assignment is to do a couple of things. take a 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, just regular printer paper. It is better that it's white paper. If you absolutely don't have a sheet of white paper, then some other kind of paper is fine. But take a 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. Any supplies, you can do this all with a pencil. It's fine. You don't have to have anything fancy. And use the 2-point perspective approach. So you can draw the 2 points on there. And the other thing with these a lot of times is you leave the construction lines. You don't go back and erase them. I mean, you can if you're trying to make something really nice, but that's why you draw them light in the first place, is so that they're not really part of the drawing, and you reinforce the drawing by making darker lines where you want them and let the construction lines just kind of fade away. Create a little shade on one side. Pick it. Your light doesn't have to come from over here. Your light can come from whatever direction you want. I wouldn't necessarily say put it right up at the top. That's going to make some odd shadows. Normally you do have it somewhere over on the left or on the right. You can follow this one exactly if you want to. Make a simple shadow the same way I did, where you don't have to draw this thing, but it does help remind you. Maybe you don't want it as part of your drawing you're going to create, but you can put it on another sheet of paper just to remind you the directions that you chose for the light ray and the cast shadow. So draw a little simple shadow and turn that in. Obviously, take a picture of it, submit it, and turn it in that way. All right, so hopefully that'll get us at least started on being able to create something that gets the ideas in our head onto a paper so that other people can see them. All right, so have fun with it. Don't worry too much. I'm not going to grade on how well this thing looks in the end. Just try and get better. If you have to do it 2 or 3 times, that's fine. Just try to practice getting your ideas on the paper. And it doesn't have to be a complex shape. It can be something simple like a box or an imaginary thing, or get an object that you can look at so you don't have to imagine it if you want to. That's fine. All right, see you next time.